Okay, it's time for chapter 8 of George's Marvellous Medicine. I feel like the medicine has been okay, but considering the book is called George's Marvellous Medicine and we're only halfway through it, I'm curious as to whether that's all that's going to happen with the medicine. You know what I mean? I feel like if it's called George's Marvellous Medicine and we're only halfway through it, there must be more to the medicine and more to the story. Otherwise it would just almost be over. Maybe if you're watching this with someone, you want to pause and talk about what you think is going to happen for the other half of the story. Do you want me to give you a few clues? That's interesting, this picture here with the chicken. If you want to pause and talk to your friends about it, feel free. This chapter is called The Brown Hen. Curious. Oh, I want to point out again how the author has used typing, but then the first letter is handwriting. And little features like that in a book are really fun to use in your own writing. George stood in the farmyard looking up at the roof. The old farmhouse had a fine roof with a roof of pale red tiles and tall chimneys. There was no sign of Grandma. There was only a strong thrush sitting in one of the chimney pots singing a song. A thrush is a type of bird. Thank goodness for that. Oh no. Suddenly, a tile came cluttering down from the roof and fell into the yard. So some of you might not know what tiles are. You know, when you see roofs of landed properties, not condos, they often have covering. They're usually about that big and they're often orange and they sit like this all the way along the roof, and then there's another layer that they're called tiles. But also on the floor, if there are squares on the floor, usually made of something that's breakable, that's called a tile. Suddenly a tile came clattering down from the roof and fell into the yard. A song thrush, it's one of those birds, took off fast and flew away. I guess it was nervous. Then another tile came down, and then another, and then half a dozen. Do you know how many a dozen is? A dozen is 12, so half a dozen is 6. So half a dozen more. Then very slowly, like some weird monster rising up from the deep, Grandma's head came through the roof. Then her scrawny neck and the top of her shoulders, like this. Then her shoulders came up through. "How am I doing, boy?" she shouted. "How's that for a bash up?" Oh, she's quite proud of herself, right? I predicted that she wouldn't like it, but she does. "Do you think you'd better stop now, Grandma?" George called out. "I have stopped. I feel terrific. Didn't I tell you I had magic powers? Didn't I warn you that I had wizardry in the tips of my fingers? But you wouldn't listen to me, would you? You wouldn't listen to your old Grandma." "You didn't do it, Grandma," George shouted back. "I did it. I made you a new medicine." "A new medicine? You? What rubbish," she yelled back. "I did," George shouted. "I did." I feel like he shouldn't be telling anyone. "You're lying as usual," Grandma yelled. "You're always lying." "I'm not lying, Grandma. I swear to it." A swear is when you say, "I definitely did it. I promise." A swear is a promise. It's also a rude word. The wrinkled old face high up on the roof stared down suspiciously at George. "Are you telling me you actually made a new medicine all by yourself?" she shouted. "Yep, Grandma, all by myself." "I don't believe you," she answered. "I'm very comfortable up here. Fetch me a cup of tea." Oh, she wants a cup of tea. Hey, she's right up here and she's asking for a cup of tea. She's a very strange lady. A brown hen was pecked about in the yard close to where George was standing. The hen gave him an idea. Quickly he uncorked, took the top off the medicine bottle and poured some of the brown stuff into a spoon. "What's this, Grandma?" he shouted, and he crouched down, holding out the spoon to the hen. Chicken, 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 he said, come here and have some of this. Oh dear, talk to your friend about what you think. If you think that's a good idea or a bad idea. He's trying to prove to Grandma that it's the medicine that made her tall by giving it to a chicken. Three, 2, 1. Let's find out whether it was a good idea. Chickens are stupid birds and very greedy, and they think everything is food. This one thought the spoon was full of corn. It hopped over, it put its head to one side, it looked at the spoon. Come on, chicken, said George. Good chicken, chick, chick, chick. And the brown hen stretched out its neck and peck. It got the beak full of medicine. The effect was electric. "Awee!" shrieked the chicken, and it shot straight in the air. like a gunshot. It shot straight in the air like a rocket. It went as high as the house. Then down it came again into the yard. Splosh! And there it sat, with its feathers all sticking straight out from its body. There was a look of amazement on its silly face. George stood watching it. Grandma up on the roof was watching it too. Do you remember what happened to Grandma when she first had it? She shot up in the air, and then the next thing. Tell your neighbour what you think the next thing is. Do you remember? The hen got to its feet. It was rather shaky, and it was making funny gurgly noises in its throat. Its beak was opening and shutting, and it seemed like a pretty sick hen. "You've done it now, you stupid boy," shouted Grandma. Do you remember? "The hen's gonna die. Your father will be after you now. He'll give you socks and serve you right." He'll give you socks. I don't know that expression. It must be English. All of a sudden, black smoke started pouring out of the hen's beak. "It's on fire, Grandma. The hen's on fire." George ran to the water trough and got a bucket of water. That hen will be roasted and ready for eating any moment," said Grandma. George sloshed the bucket of water over the hen. There it was, the sizzling sound, and the smoke went away. "Old hen's laid its last egg," Grandma shouted. "Hens don't do any laying after they've been on fire." Now that the fire was out, the hen seemed better. It stood up properly, flapped its wings. It crouched down low on the ground as though getting ready to jump. It did jump. It jumped high in the air, turned a complete somersault, and then landed back on its feet. "It's a circus hen," shouted Grandma from the rooftop. "It's a flipping acrobat." Now you know what's going to happen to the hen. It began to grow and grow and grow and grow. Ooh-hoo-hoo. Oh look, he's bigger than George. George has created quite a problem. George had been waiting for this to happen. "It's growing," he yelled. "It's growing, Grandma. Look, it's growing." Bigger and bigger, taller and taller it grew. Soon the hen was 4 or 5 times its normal size. "Can you see it, Grandma?" George shouted. Remember, George is trying to prove to Grandma that he made her grow big. So he's given it to the chicken. "I can see it, boy. I'm watching it." George was hopping about from one foot to the other with excitement, and he was pointing at the enormous hen and shouting, "It's had the magic medicine, Grandma. It's growing just like you did." But there was a difference between the way the hen was growing and the way Grandma grew. When Grandma grew taller and taller, she got thinner and thinner. The hen didn't. It stayed nice and plump. That's kind of like fat all around. Soon it was taller than George, but it didn't stop there. It went right on growing until it was about as big as what do you think? Yeah, have a guess. Tell your neighbour what you think. As big as this one says horse. Then it stopped. Horse. Then it stopped. Doesn't it look marvellous, Grandma? George shouted. It's not as tall as me, Grandma sang out. Compared with me, this hen is titchy and small. I am the tallest of them all. I'm going to read you the next chapter now. Chapter 9. The pig, the bullocks, that's a type of cow, the sheep, the pony, and the nanny goat. Oh no, hang on. The pig, the bullock, the sheep, the pony, and the nanny goat. This does not seem good. Okay, and I'll also show you the picture so you can predict what you think is going to happen. I'm predicting that's Mum and Dad, and I'm predicting they are not going to be happy. At that moment, George's mother came back from shopping in the village. She drove her car into the yard and got out. She was carrying a bottle of milk in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. I think if I was carrying things and I saw a giant chicken and my mum with her head sticking out the roof of the house, I think I'd drop everything in fright. Let's see what Mummy did. The first thing she saw was the giant brown hen towering over little George. She dropped the milk bottle. Then Grandma started shouting at her from the rooftop, and when she looked up and saw Grandma's head sticking up through the tiles, she dropped the bag of groceries. How about that then, eh, Mary? Grandma shouted. I bet you never seen a hen as big as that. That's George's hen, that is. Stammered George's mother. It's George's magic medicine, Grandma shouted. We both had it, the hen and I. She's acting like it's normal. But how in the world did you get up on the roof? Cried Mum. I didn't, cackled the old lady. My feet are still on the ground in the living room. This was too much for George's mother to understand. She just goggled and gaped. She looked as though she was going to faint. A second later, George's father appeared. His name was Mr. Killy Cranny. Mr. Cranny was a small man with bandy legs and a huge head. He was a kind father to George, but he was not an easy person to live with because even the smallest things got him all excited. The hen standing in the yard was certainly not a small thing. And when Mr. Cranny saw that it started jumping about, he started jumping about as though something was burning his feet. Great heavens, he cried, waving his arms. What's that? What's happened? Where did it come from? It's a giant hen. Who did that? I did, said George. Look at me, Grandma shouted from the rooftop. Never mind the hen, look at me. Mr. Cranky looked up at Grandma and said, Be quiet, Grandma. He didn't seem to surprise him that his mum was sitting up there, sticking up through the roof. It was the hen that excited him. He had never seen anything like it. But then, who had? It's fantastic, Mr. Cranky shouted, dancing around. It's colossal. Oh, here comes some good describing words. It's colossal. It's gigantic. It's tremendous. It's a miracle. George, how did you do it? George started telling his father about the magic medicine. While he was doing this, the big brown hen sat down in the middle of the yard, went clock, clock, clock. And what do you think it did? Everyone stared. And when it stood up again, it was a big, big brown egg lying in the middle of the yard. Oh, that's going to be interesting. I wonder how big it is. If the chicken's so big, the chicken's taller than me, I wonder how big the egg is. The egg was the size of a football. Ooh. This egg would make scrambled eggs for 20 people, Mrs. Cranky said. George, how much of this medicine have you got? Lots, said George. There's a big saucepan full in the kitchen, and this bottle is nearly half full. Come with me, Mr. Cranky yelled, grabbing George by the arm. Bring the medicine. For years and years I've been trying to make bigger and bigger animals. Bigger bulls, bigger cows, bigger pigs, bigger sheep. They went to the pigsty first. George gave a spoonful of medicine to the pig. The pig blew smoke from his nose, jumped all about the place, and then grew and grew. And in the end, it looked like this. See the people there? Now he's a farmer, so he wants big pigs because then he can sell them for their meat, and that's a lot of meat. They went to the herd of fine black bullocks with the cows that Mr. Cranky was trying to fatten up to sell at the market. George gave each of them some medicine, and this is what happened. Well, this is unexpected. I thought George would be in trouble. Is he in trouble? Then he went to the sheep. He gave some to the ponies. You can see the size change from that picture to that picture. Sometimes an author doesn't actually need to write the words, they can use illustrations to tell part of the story. And finally, just for fun, he gave some to Alma, the nanny goat. Here we go. Start at the top. Well, that's a problem. You can see the comparison, tiny, huge. And I guess, look, it's a girl goat, it's got udders, so he's going to milk it for all the milk. There's going to be a lot of milk come out of that goat. Oh, I thought George would be in trouble, but it sounds as if George's father's really happy with him. You might want to talk to your neighbour and check your neighbour understands why Dad's happy with him rather than angry with him.